December 1942, Berlin's Islamic Central Institute is inaugurated. The inaugural address is given by Amin al-Husseini, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. In it, he rails against the supposed common enemies of Germany and Islam, the Jews, the Americans, and the British. He hails the war as a momentous opportunity for Muslims to free themselves from oppression, an unholy alliance, a marriage of convenience, or a partnership of the like-minded. I'm Spartacus Olson. Welcome to a World War II in Real-Time Bio Special. Today looking at Grand Mufti Amin al-Husseini and the relationship between his version of Islam and Nazism. The Führer's and the Nazis' racism is not just anti-Semitic. They are also no fans of organized religion. Sure, he tolerates the Catholic and Protestant churches for political reasons, but he regards both as a threat to Nazi control of society. One would assume that makes Amin al-Husseini a religious leader of the Islamic faith an unlikely ally. But perhaps it is here, as they say, that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And if we look at the Mufti's journey from Jerusalem to Berlin, it does look that way. In May 1921, the British authorities in Mandatory Palestine appoint him Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. He's named chairman of the Palestine's Supreme Muslim Council a year later. These roles give him control over the mandate's Sharia courts, religious funding, and endowments, and over some of the holiest sites in Islam. It grants him great influence over the Muslim community in Palestine, and he soon emerges as a figurehead for Muslims across the globe. In hindsight, it might look strange that the British choose him specifically, but in 1921, he is thought of as a moderate. Yes, he's an Arab nationalist who served as a recruiter for the Arab revolt against the Ottomans in 1916, but he's also been willing to work with the imperial authorities. Before the revolt, he had served in the Ottoman army before switching allegiance to the British. Moreover, he hails from a wealthy and influential family benefiting from colonial rule, and it is hoped that he will maintain the imperial status quo. These are volatile times in the Middle East. After the Great War, the British promised Emir Faisal, one of the emerging leaders of a pan-Arabic federation, that they would get their own country. Arabism, the idea of a united ethnic Arab nation, had emerged at the end of the 19th century and was one of the driving factors that enabled the British to unite the Arab tribes against Ottoman rule. Imperialist Zionism, the idea of an ethnic Jewish state, was arising. After centuries of persecution in Europe, where most Jews now lived, the Zionists sought a national haven for their people. Among a variety of proposals, most eventually concentrated on Palestine, the birthplace of Judaism and still home to a 5% Jewish minority. While many Arab leaders opposed the idea, the Balfour Declaration of 1917 was issued by the British, offering a Jewish state within what would become the British Mandate in Palestine. With these British promises in 1919, Faisal met with Chaim Weizmann, the Zionist leader who had negotiated the Balfour Declaration, and made an agreement that guaranteed a Jewish state within a new Arabic federation, with Faisal demanding that the Jewish state would stay within the area of the Arab independence and be conditioned on such independence. Although the Zionists submit the agreement to the Paris Peace Conference without Faisal's conditions, Faisal manages to forge an agreement with the other Arab leaders, and it looks like both the Arab Federation and the Jewish state might become reality. But it's an illusion. The British, under pressure by the French and their interests in the Middle East, renege on their promises to both Faisal and to Weizmann. And the whole thing comes apart around the same time as al-Husseini is appointed Grand Mufti. In the conflict that ensues, the French and British use rule by division by promising various Arab factions different levels of independence, pitting them against each other, and creating an environment where ethnic changes, including Jewish immigration, becomes a greater and greater perceived threat to the status quo. It also works with al-Husseini, who plays along with British rule but begins to agitate heavily against Jewish immigration to Palestine. In 1928, his Supreme Muslim Council spreads rumors of a Zionist plot to destroy the Muslim holy sites on Temple Mount. These lead to violent clashes a year later, with 113 Jews and 116 Arabs killed in August 1929. In December 1931, he organizes a World Islamic Congress in Jerusalem, calling for a boycott on trade with Jews and declaring Zionism an aggression detrimental to Muslim well-being. The conflict is continuously seeded by the British, still tolerating limited Jewish immigration to Palestine, with both Zionists and Arabists increasingly vocal and violent in their demands. With the British, as always, unwilling to commit fully to one side, the Mufti sends out feelers to Hitler instead. A week after the passing of the Enabling Act in March 1933, the Mufti meets Heinrich Wolf, the German consul general in Jerusalem. Wolf's record of the meeting is as follows. The Mufti made detailed statements to me today to the effect that Muslims inside and outside of Palestine salute the new regime in Germany and hope for the spread of fascist and anti-democratic leadership to other countries. A month later, at a second meeting near the Dead Sea, the Mufti and Palestinian sheikhs express approval of the anti-Jewish measures enacted in Germany. Still, at this point, the relationship is limited to mutual rhetorical support. Al-Husseini despises the Jews, but would still rather see a political than military solution. In 1933, he refuses a request by Muhammad al-Qassam, a Syrian preacher and Arab nationalist, to join a jihad against the Jews and British. On the other side, Nazi Germany has little desire to be seen meddling in Middle Eastern politics. They are now solving their Jewish question by encouraging Jewish immigration to Palestine. Upsetting the British would jeopardize this. As such, in June 1933, they declined to assist with setting up a Nazi-inspired Arab nationalist party. But al-Husseini will only sit on the fence for so long. By the end of 1935, the situation in Palestine is deteriorating rapidly. Al-Qassam is shot dead by British police in November and becomes a martyr for the cause. The next year, on April 19th, a general strike is called. Husseini initially dithers, but on the 25th, he takes leadership of the newly formed Arab Higher Committee, which leads the protest and calls for an end to Jewish immigration. This Arab revolt quickly descends into Muslim versus Jewish violence. The British outlaw the Higher Committee and issue a warrant for al-Husseini's arrest in July. He flees Palestine in October 1937. Husseini finds refuge in Syria and Lebanon under French mandate. Under pressure from French authorities, he flees to Iraq in October 1939. It's here that he once again crosses into the Axis orbit. Iraq is an independent monarchy headed by a pro-British regent, but many government ministers and army officers are pro-German, and the country has become a haven for exiled nationalist leaders. Al-Husseini soon falls in with a group of army officers under Rashid Ali al-Gailani, who are planning a coup. In preparation, al-Husseini sends his private secretary to Berlin in January 1941 with a letter to Hitler. He stresses the role that a pro-German Iraq could play in disrupting British communications and in supplying oil to the Reich. With German troops fighting in North Africa, Hitler is interested. He responds on April 3rd that he recognizes and supports Arab independence and that if Arabs were to fight the British, he would provide military assistance. The coup breaks out on April 1st. With Hitler's attention on the upcoming invasion of the Soviet Union, he sends little more than a token contribution from the Luftwaffe, along with some shipments of ammunition. The plotters are initially successful. Rashid Ali installs himself as prime minister, but they are decisively defeated by the British and Transjordanian forces in May. In the aftermath, al-Husseini flees Iraq. He makes his way through Iran, Turkey, and Italy and arrives in Berlin on November 6th. On the 28th, he is invited to meet Hitler. The two men establish their common enemies, the British, the Jews, and the Bolsheviks. Husseini assures Hitler that Arabs are ready to cooperate with Germany with all their hearts. Hitler, however, refuses to give a written commitment guaranteeing future Arab, particularly Palestinian, independence. Hitler states that it's too early for these considerations, but that once Germany has destroyed Judeo-Bolshevism in Europe, the Reich's objectives will be to destroy the Jewish element in the Arab world. Far more interesting to Hitler and the Nazis than any notion of Arab independence is Husseini's potential as an anti-British propagandist. The Germans have already been targeting the Muslim world with propaganda since 1939. And that year, an Arabic-language radio station was established in Seesen, a small town southwest of Berlin, which boasts one of the most powerful shortwave radio transmitters in existence. The station's Berlin in Arabic and Voice of Free Arabism target the estimated 90,000 shortwave radios present in the Middle East and North Africa. Radio is crucial to propaganda in the region as adult literacy is very low. Radios are often installed in cafes, markets, and other public places and reach a large audience. The stations themselves are staffed by German Middle East scholars and by native Arabic speakers. The programs, which always start with a reading of Quranic verses, aim to establish Germany's war as a battle against the joint enemies of Nazism and Islam. Al-Husseini soon makes himself central to this propaganda effort. In summer 1942, Ribbentrop decides to step up the German propaganda to coincide with Rommel's success in North Africa. On June 16th, Husseini makes a broadcast in which he welcomes the forthcoming defeat of the British, who are working together with Jewish capitalism. It's not just the radio either. In July, 200,000 leaflets are flown to North Africa with an appeal by Husseini for Muslims to join the Axis cause. A broadcast on July 7th is typical of the German calls to arms. According to the Muslim religion, the defense of your life is a duty which can only be fulfilled by annihilating the Jews. Kill the Jews, burn their property, destroy their stores, annihilate these base supporters of British imperialism. Your sole hope of salvation lies in annihilating the Jews before they annihilate you. Other than an apparent mutual hatred for Jews, why should Muslims support the Nazis? Well, the propagandists try and draw a supposed commonality between Nazism and Islam. Hitler retains the view that Arabs are racially inferior, but he does have some admiration for Islam as a religion. It's a very one-dimensional understanding of it, and he picks and chooses the bits which fit in with his worldview. But he believes it to embody values of strength, discipline, practicality, and community, qualities that he sees as central to Nazism. Perhaps in justification of his genocidal expansionism, Hitler admires Islam as a religion that had spread the faith by the sword. At least that's according to Albert Speer after the war. On the whole, though, the Nazis see the Muslim population as a source of manpower and little more. Thus, when the Allies land in North Africa, propaganda efforts are redoubled. Evoking memories of the Crusades, Axis propaganda frames Operation Torch as an aggression by the Anglo-Saxon and Jewish world against the Arab Muslims. On November 11th, broadcasting from Rome on Radio Bari, the Italian propaganda radio, Husseini warns that if the invasion is not repelled, the Jews will establish their national home not only in Syria, Lebanon, and Transjordan and Egypt, but also throughout all the neighboring Arab countries. The Arabs must struggle against the British and the Jews, the deadliest enemies of Islam, shoulder to shoulder with the Axis. This brings us to December and the opening of the Islamic Central Institute. The Foreign Office sees a new institute as a means to cement ties between the Nazi regime and Islam. With the support of exiles such as al-Husseini, it will also be a propaganda hub. Everything about the opening ceremony is designed with the religious context in mind. The opening day, December 18th, is the Muslim holiday of Eid al-Adha. In attendance are Muslim troops of the Wehrmacht's Azerbaijani Legion. The opening address, approved by Ribbentrop and broadcast across North Africa and the Middle East, is given by al-Husseini. He calls once more for Muslims to rise up against the Jews and their allies. This war, which has been unleashed by world Judaism, offers Muslims the best opportunity to free themselves from persecution and oppression. The Muslim who fears somebody else besides God or yields to his enemies and places his fate voluntarily in their hands is not a Muslim anymore. There is no God but Allah. But is this propaganda making any difference? Well, not really. Far more Muslims will serve in the armies of the British Empire and the Free French than will ever heed the call of al-Husseini and Hitler. The Axis can produce all the propaganda in the world, but they've been in North Africa for 2.5 years now, and they still haven't pushed the Allies out. And now, the Allies are turning the tide and landing with huge new forces. How can the Axis claim to be liberators when they look to be losing the war? Husseini will continue his alignment with the Nazis. He will crusade against the Jews, will meet Heinrich Himmler, tour concentration camps, and recruit Muslims into the SS. But right now his words must be ringing pretty hollow to any sympathizers in Cairo, Benghazi, or East Jerusalem. But what the propaganda most certainly does is to sow further seeds of division that will continue to plague the Mediterranean and Middle East region for many decades to come. If you'd like to learn more about Palestine and the Middle East and the interwar years, then check out our Between Two Wars episode on Zionism, Arabism, and colonialism in the Middle East right here. And to make sure that we can continue to expose our past free of divisive outside influence, join the Time Ghost Army at patreon.com or at timeghost.tv. Never forget.